So, a little bit more about the Milestone program itself. Here's a photograph of the CDMA Milestone plaque at Qualcomm San Diego. On the right here is myself with Kathy Hayashi, who just spoke. And it was really neat. There was a story with Kathy. I was talking to her at an event at Google back in 2013, and I had just gotten off my first milestone, and I was so psyched about it that I told her, I found out she was working at Qualcomm. Well, hey, talk to the folks at Qualcomm and find out something cool that they did. I knew that they did a lot of cool stuff, so I figured she'd find something. Indeed, CDMA was honored in 2017 with a milestone plaque. If you enter the grounds of Qualcomm, if you go to their facility in San Diego, it will be dead center right in front of you as you walk toward the main building. They are so proud of that. It's so beautiful. There's even a little bench there. People can hang out there. There's even room for another plaque. Hint, hint. So a little bit of information about some of the other milestones in the world. There's one at Abbey Road Studios. Everybody thinks Abbey Road Studios, okay, the Beatles created that. Well, it actually was started in 1931. The very first stereophonic recording ever made was made at what was then called EMI Studios. And anyway, so people don't know that, but if you go to Abbey Road Studios, you will see a plaque to the right. There's a famous blue plaque that you'll see on many important buildings in England. To the left, you'll see a IEEE milestone plaque to the right of the main entry. Also, Bletchley Park, if you ever travel, it's about a 1-hour train ride north of London. It's an incredible museum at Bletchley Park, and that's where they did the code breaking with Alan Turing and many, many others during World War II. So as you enter the main building, you see that building, the first photograph there, you'll see, turn to your right, there is a milestone plaque right there. Also, the bullet train in Japan has one. The SPICE circuit simulation program, which Ivan Sutherland mentioned yesterday during his keynote in the afternoon, is at UC Berkeley. CD audio player, there's one in the Netherlands, and CDMA, as we already mentioned, for the basis for 3G cellular is at Qualcomm. So like I noted, there's 231 of these milestones around the world. We are today celebrating the 232nd IEEE milestone. Here's an example of another one that I worked on for the Apollo 11 Lunar Laser Ranging Experiment. Now, when the Apollo 11 astronauts went to the moon, they left a retroreflector on the surface of the moon. This retroreflector, you see the photograph in the middle, allowed people on Earth to shine a laser beam at the moon, and after they shot trillions of photons, they were able to detect about a dozen reflected back. Measuring the time it took for that round trip, divide by 2, based on the speed of light, you know the exact distance to the moon with centimeter accuracy. That was a fun one, and that was dedicated at Lick Observatory above San Jose. Interesting story behind that is they were trying to do it at the Haleakala in Hawaii and also in Texas, and the Soviets were trying to do it too. We suddenly see these other lasers showing what's going on. The Soviets had actually sent a retroreflector to the moon about 10 days earlier, unmanned, and so it fell into a crater. Useless. But they're trying to make use of our retroreflector. Anyway, interesting story that not many people know. Other milestones include the birthplace of Silicon Valley. This is where Shockley Labs was, and you see a photograph in the bottom right. Also, very near that one is one for Moore's Law. And here's there's a model of a silicon crystal and a fountain, and right in the front, if you look real closely, you'll see a plaque there, and that's for Moore's Law. Moore's Law played a very important role with everything we're talking about here today, and the reason that we're able to see computer graphics so easily as an everyday thing. If you read Alvy Ray's book about history, or a biography of the pixel, you'll learn all about the importance of Moore's Law. It affects so many other things as well, but that story is quite interesting. Also, Shaky the Robot. This is really interesting. This is a project that was done at SRI starting in 1966. It was the first mobile intelligent robot. You see the pictures on the right. As this robot would move around, it would use a camera to look at objects. And this is the first time really anything was done with cameras and computers and being able to discern objects. This is the first time this was ever done. And a database was created of these objects that was in a room that Shaky would maneuver around in, and then Shaky could use that database to maneuver later effortlessly because it knew where all the objects were. That technique is used to this day whenever you use, for example, Google Maps to get to where you're going. It came from Shaky the Robot. Another interesting thing is, how did they get money to try to build a robot? This is an ARPA-funded thing, just like the work here started in 1965 at the University of Utah. They used the term mobile automaton. Does that sound like a robot? Well, if you're talking to DARPA, DARPA didn't think robot, they didn't think science fiction. They thought, oh, that's interesting. They funded it. They ended up funding a robot. Another interesting thing is Ampex videotape recorder. That's got another milestone. It's on the Stanford campus. Bing Crosby didn't like to have to sacrifice his golf game for his TV show. So he funded Ampex and their videotape recorder business. And you'll see in the photograph here on the right, the second person from the left is Ray Dolby. He worked on that project. And that won an award at the NAB conference in 1957 for that videotape recorder. Also, the ARPANET, the first ARPANET transmission from UCLA to SRI in 1969 has a milestone plaque at each location. If you notice University of Utah there, that was node number 4 on the ARPANET. Also, AlohaNet, this is something that was in Hawaii and it ended up inspiring Bob Metcalfe. And the Ethernet came out of that because some of the techniques with regard to a random retry when collisions would happen. So, in fact, interestingly enough, I submitted an application for a milestone for Ethernet early this week. The next day, Bob Metcalfe won the Turing Award. Kind of amazing. Also, the gravitational wave antenna. There's 3 of these in the world. The 2 that are in the US, one in Hanford, Washington, one in Livingston, Louisiana, detected the collision of 2 black holes 1.3 billion light years away. And this verified a key aspect of Einstein's general theory of relativity from 1916. In 2015, 99 years later, very interesting milestone I worked on. This was an international thing because there's also a third milestone, or third observatory in Italy. And once they had 3 of them, they could actually triangulate in space to find out where those gravitational waves were emanating from. Kind of a mind-blowing thing. These are the most sensitive instruments on the face of the Earth. Some upcoming milestones are for the Apple 3 Apple computers, Apple I, Apple II, and Macintosh. I worked on these with Tom Coughlin, who's the currently IEEE president-elect. Hope to be dedicating those soon. Also, I worked with the 3 gentlemen who designed the Intel 4004 microprocessor, the first single-chip microprocessor. Those will be dedicated soon. Also, I initiated one for Universal Serial Bus. Most of that work was done up at in the Portland area in Hillsboro, and hopefully that'll be dedicated soon. And also coming up on May 3rd will be a dedication of one for the IEEE 754 floating point arithmetic standard. That's another thing that Ivan Sutherland mentioned yesterday, but this is a milestone coming up in May, and it'll be dedicated on the UC Berkeley campus. Also upcoming is one for RenderMan. This kind of mates with the one here for Utah, because the work at Utah directly went into the was the basis for what RenderMan was. So when this plaque is dedicated, there'll be 2 plaques at the entrance to Pixar Animation Studios in Emeryville, California. One for RenderMan and one for the Utah milestone. Also, if you ever visit the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, there is a wall in the front of the museum that now has 16 plaques on it. This is the most plaques of any place in the world. I helped initiate a program there where we'd put duplicate plaques for one. So we've been adding a number of these. Recently, there's a milestone I was involved with in the UK last year for the Manchester Baby and Atlas computers. They have duplicates of both of those. There's going to be a duplicate for the Utah one and a duplicate for the RenderMan one at the museum as well. So I think that's a neat way to bring the museum into the whole picture here with regard to milestones. Now, what I'd like to do now is recognize some of the members of David Evans' family. I know a number of them have come to the event here. Could they stand up, please? I know not all of them are here today, but of course David can't be here, but his spirit is absolutely here by way of his family members. Many others here, they're probably being held up by snow, I figure, but I think there's 7 or 8 of them at least who are here in town for this. So this leads into a talk about Remembering David Evans by Alan Kay. Unfortunately, he can't be here, but he pre-recorded a little video that we're going to be playing. He's in the UK right now. Alan is an ACM Turing Award laureate, just like Bob Metcalf and so many other people involved with this milestone. Also won the Kyoto Prize. And if you've ever read Walter Isaacson's book called The Innovators, he's got a wonderful little quote in there. Alan wandered off to graduate school at the University of Utah, which he ended up considering the best luck I ever had, quote unquote. The computer science pioneer David Evans was building there the best graphics program in the country. I give you Alan Kay.
Dave Evans is the main reason we are here today, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the University of Utah's Computer Science Department and the IEEE Milestone. This is because Dave's presence made truly amazingly great things happen around him, and it was often difficult to see just how he did it. Don't expect to hear anything balanced here. We love Dave. When I first stumbled into his office in 1966 as grad student number 7, he looked impossibly young. He was wearing a short-sleeved golf shirt, and my first thought was, if I ever do anything in computing, I won't have to wear a white shirt and tie. Dave immediately handed me a copy of Ivan Sutherland's Sketchpad thesis and said, "Take this and read it." And I'll tell the rest of this story this afternoon. Now, the big deal about Dave was that he treated everyone, especially we students, as supremely capable, as though we were full-fledged researchers who just didn't have their PhDs yet. Most of us resolved to never lower his opinion. Dave liked giving odd ducks a chance. He called them outliers. He never looked at transcripts, but he liked weird resumes. And by the way, it's interesting to note that almost everyone invited to speak at this celebration today was one of Dave's odd ducks. Ivan recalls Dave saying, "Everyone can find somebody who can help him work better." And that was the basic idea at Utah and in most of the ARPA community. Dave had terrific insights himself, but he kind of murmured him. I remember him pointing out in my first days the exponential difficulties back then of what was called the hidden line problem. But Dave thought that on a raster of pixels, like on a television set, it could be an n-log n sorting program, kind of like quicksort, because 9 recursive subdivisions would get you down to a pixel. And later, John Warnock independently came up with the first really good way to do this, and it was indeed a recursive subdividing algorithm, and both CGI and the University of Utah were launched. When some of the faculty members once complained about a person who was too outspoken, Dave said to them, "We don't care if they're prima donnas as long as they can sing." I once tried to thank Dave, but I told him I didn't know how. You can't adequately thank somebody who essentially saved your life. He's just said to me, "Pass it on." Now, Dave wasn't transactional. He didn't trade favors. It was too tiny an idea of life. It's kind of like business's too tiny goals of just making money. Dave's way was to make something like a garden and tend that garden so that many things would have every chance to grow by themselves. His idea was to just do good deeds everywhere and every time you can without any hope of return. And much of the time, the angelic side of human nature will nudge other humans to start helping themselves. And you know what? With Dave around, that's just what happened. Thank you very much.